the second half of 1990, a giant coalition force assembled in the Persian Gulf. When these formations were finally in place, they launched a massive attack on Iraqi forces. The ensuing conflict included the combat debuts of many major weapon systems. Chief among these was the American M1 Abrams main battle tank. The ground offensive phase of the operation, codenamed Desert Storm, lasted just 100 hours. By the end of hostilities, Iraq's fighting capability was shattered. Thousands of its tanks and artillery were destroyed. Throughout July 1990, coalition intelligence revealed a huge buildup of Iraqi forces along the border with Kuwait. On August 2nd, Saddam Hussein's forces crossed the border and occupied the Kuwaiti capital, Kuwait City. The invasion was immediately followed by a request from the United States to allow their troops into Saudi Arabia to deter and counter any Iraqi aggression against that country. Along with its allies, the U.S. launched Operation Desert Shield to protect Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Persian Gulf. The logistics effort was to last 7 months and was eventually of a scale comparable to the Normandy invasion of World War II. On August 7th, the first squadrons of U.S. Air Force F-15 fighters were deployed to the Gulf, together with 2 carrier battle groups, an airborne division, and AWACS, Airborne Warning and Control System aircraft. Within 38 hours of their notification to deploy, F-15s were sitting alert 7,000 miles from their U.S. departure bases and ready for defensive patrols along the Iraqi-Saudi border. Thousands of vehicles, aircraft, and ships had to be transported to a hostile desert environment. 7 billion tons of military supplies were stockpiled into 10 square-mile depots, while half of all U.S. armed forces moved into the Persian Gulf. Desert Shield witnessed the largest airlift since World War II. This totaled nearly 500,000 personnel and over 500,000 tons of cargo. It was the equivalent of moving a small city halfway around the world, along with all its people, vehicles, food, and household goods. Bombs and missiles were also transported by air. These were carefully chosen for their suitability in the imminent war. Every day, over 900 storage depots each dispatched 15 truckloads of ammunition for onward transportation to the Gulf. The U.S. forces deployed units from all over the world to the Gulf region, like this Marine Corps CH-53 from Hawaii, air-freighted by an Air Force Galaxy. The most important shipment from Europe involved over 600 M1A1 tanks with 120mm guns and their chemical protection systems. Most came from U.S. bases in Germany. Naval vessels sailed across the Atlantic and into the Mediterranean. These included the supercarrier USS Independence, together with her complement of warplanes, seen here passing through the Suez Canal. All these needed regular supplies and refueling on the way. By September, over 700 tanks, 600 armored personnel carriers, 600 Bradley fighting vehicles, 150 helicopter gunships, 300 howitzers, and 50,000 soldiers had already been deployed to the Gulf. The flow of troops and equipment was faster every day and quickly overwhelmed the available resources. Initially, many soldiers slept on the sand. Before aircraft were deployed in quantity to the Gulf, it was essential to protect the airfields, and this task fell to the Patriot missile. This has a range of over 40 miles and is armed with a 200-pound high-explosive warhead. Gradually, the quaysides of Saudi Arabia were filled with coalition weapons. These included artillery and the all-important tanks. The arrival of the Abrams tank in theater was much welcomed by coalition forces. It was available in increasingly significant numbers and capable of defeating any tank in the Iraqi inventory. The M1 mounts a powerful smoothbore main gun. The Abrams hull and turret are built of a material similar to the highly successful ceramic and steel plate Chobham armor developed in Britain. Because of its stabilized gun mount, the M1 can fire reliably when moving at speed over rough ground. The 120-millimeter rounds fired by the M1 in the Gulf incorporated depleted uranium, a waste product of the nuclear weapons industry. As well as being 2.5 times tougher than steel, the projectile crosses a battlefield at the incredible muzzle velocity of nearly a mile a second. The Abrams were equipped with sensors to detect enemy vehicles. Their gun computers would zero in the first round in fewer than 6 seconds. And then, if necessary, a second and a third round were fired until the target was knocked out. At the start of Operation Desert Shield, the mechanized and infantry units unpacked their weapons and prepared for any war that developed from the current situation. The environment was hostile, with soaring temperatures and hurricane-force winds in summer. Heavy rains in winter could turn the desert sands into a quagmire. The sand made its way into everything. Constant attention was necessary to keep weapons and equipment in good working order. But tank crews came to grips with the heat and the dust. The ground forces consisted of U.S., British, French, and several Arab units. There were 40,000 well-equipped Egyptians who had trained with the Americans in multinational exercises. The Saudis also used American equipment, including M60 tanks, but lacked manpower and experience. The Kuwaitis also lacked training and had lost much of their equipment to the invading Iraqis. They operated Russian-built T-72 tanks, as did the Syrians, the remaining major Arab coalition partner. Everyone trained for a possible attack. Using satellite intelligence, the forces replicated Iraqi tank ditches, minefields, and wire entanglements. There was also much concern that the Iraqis might use chemical weapons, so provisions were made for the decontamination of soldiers and their equipment. An important element of any battle is command and control. On the ground, parallel chains of command were established between U.S., Arab, and European troops. The entire effort was coordinated by General Norman Schwarzkopf, commander of U.S. Central Command. In the air, the all-new J-STARS aircraft was deployed to the Gulf. J-STARS, Joint Surveillance Target Attack Radar System, was able to show the Army, in real time, what was directly in front of it. For example, it revealed that some of the frontline Iraqi forces were not dug in for protection. Desert Shield also witnessed a massive naval buildup. By January 1991, a force of approximately 75,000 sailors and 82,000 Marines had been deployed to the Persian Gulf in 110 ships. 4 carriers were deployed inside the Gulf, adding their strike capability to that of the land-based coalition air forces in the region. 2 other carrier battle groups were stationed in the Red Sea. This effectively surrounded Iraq with an airstrike capability from 4 principal axes. Against the background of diplomatic efforts to avert any military action, the U.S. defense establishment geared up for war. U.S. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney and Colin Powell, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, visited Saudi Arabia numerous times to discuss the military buildup with General Schwarzkopf. By January 15th, the last hopes of peace evaporated. Congress authorized military action and a final demand for Iraqi troops to withdraw from Kuwait. At 2 a.m. on January 17th, Apache helicopter gunships flew into western Iraq and knocked out radar installations with their Hellfire missiles. They were followed by over 100 coalition strike aircraft, which passed through the gap in the radar, bound for key strategic targets in Iraq. The first bomb of the war was dropped on an air defense control center by an F-117 stealth fighter. The first airstrikes were supported by nighttime offshore bombardment provided by the battleship USS Wisconsin and her 16-inch guns. At the same time, over 100 Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched against Baghdad from ships in the Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Eastern Mediterranean. The Iraqis were totally surprised. A defiant Saddam Hussein declared that the mother of all battles had begun. Coalition air forces quickly gained control of the skies. Flying 2,000 sorties every day, they hit targets such as nuclear and chemical facilities, command and control centers, and airfields. All these attacks were designed to prepare the battlefield for subsequent ground operations. Starting on January 20th, the coalition began moving its 270,000 troops into position for the attack. To get a clear picture of what lay behind enemy lines, the High Command deployed American and British Special Operations Forces in conjunction with Saudi paratroopers. These forces would also check that the ground terrain would support heavy armor. They discovered that the Iraqis had placed most of their tanks in fixed positions behind sand excavations in the desert. Their artillery pieces were also placed defensively in localized batteries, connected by zigzagging World War I-style trenches. This was in contrast with the coalition strategy, which was based on the high mobility of its forces. During final preparations for an all-out ground offensive, the air war continued. At the same time, coalition ground forces stepped up artillery bombardments of Iraqi positions. These were supported by further battleship fire from the USS Wisconsin and the USS Missouri. To obtain accurate ranging, Pioneer unmanned aerial vehicles were flown over enemy lines to send back real-time video of the shells arriving. Iraqi soldiers even surrendered to these little aircraft, since they knew their arrival would soon be followed by heavy, deadly accurate shelling. The coalition stepped up their artillery bombardment and raids by attack helicopter. Gradually, they won the battle for no man's land. G-Day, Ground Offensive Day, was set for February 24th. It became clear that the Iraqis had set fire to the Kuwaiti oil fields in order to inflict the maximum damage before departing. During this time, the Iraqis offered to withdraw from Kuwait within 21 days, but the offer was rejected by President George H.W. Bush, who demanded they exit Kuwait by noon on February 23rd, the day before G-Day. By now, the G-Day plan had been finalized and agreed to by coalition commanders. The plan was to create 5 sectors. On the left flank was the 18th Airborne Corps. This consisted of 2 U.S. airborne divisions, the 82nd and 101st, together with the French 6th Light Armored Division and the 24th Mechanized Infantry. To their right was the 7th Corps. In this sector were the 1st and 3rd Armored Divisions, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and the British 1st Armored Division. Further east was Joint Forces Command North, consisting of Saudi Arabian, Egyptian, and Syrian forces. Adjacent to them was the Marine Central Command, the 1st and 2nd Marine Divisions, and the 1st Tiger Brigade of the Army's 2nd Armored Division. Finally, on the coast was the Joint Forces Command East, made up of Saudi Arabian forces. This huge multinational force was poised along a line that extended 300 miles from the Persian Gulf into the desert. Iraq's most modern tank was the Soviet-made T-72, inspected here by its U.S. captors. It was based on a 20-year-old design with an effective firing range 1,000 yards short of late-model Western tanks. The T-72 represented only 20% of the total Iraqi tank force, most being older T-54s and T-55s. Iraq's 5,000 tanks and 500 troops made up what General Schwarzkopf called the 4th largest army in the world. On February 24th, after 38 days of continuous air attacks on Iraq, President Bush directed Central Command to begin the ground offensive. General Schwarzkopf unleashed an all-out attack against Iraqi forces very early on the morning of February 24th. Massive artillery, rocket, helicopter, and air bombardment began. The battle started in smog-filled conditions caused by 150 burning oil wells. Combat engineer units broke through the weak Iraqi frontline fortifications. Over the next 3 days, the forces would carry out a left hook maneuver that would take them hundreds of miles into Iraqi territory. The 18th Airborne Corps was in the far west. Here, 2 U.S. airborne divisions, together with the French 6th Light Armored Division, started the massive western left hook envelopment with a ground assault to secure the coalition left flank. Their attack continued into the night. They kept on course with the aid of long-range electronic navigation, image enhancement scopes, and global positioning systems. By midnight, the divisions were 70 miles into Iraq, where they established a forward base at As Salman Airfield, 90 miles east of the Saudi-Iraq border. Meanwhile, on the eastern flank of their sector, the 24th Mechanized Infantry Division and 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment moved 93 miles east into Iraq and established a forward operating base. In the approximate center of the coalition line was the 7th Corps. Resembling a mini-army, the Corps included 1,500 Bradley fighting vehicles and 1,500 M1 A1 tanks. To operate, they needed almost 6 million gallons of fuel a day. With the front moving faster than expected, General Schwarzkopf decided to advance the 7th Corps main attack by 14 hours. As a result, they completed a double envelopment of Iraqi forces and destroyed 3 heavy Republican Guard divisions. The 1st and 3rd Armored Divisions and the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment had cut through 50% of the Iraqi defensive lines. In this sector, there were delays as tanks with mine rollers and rakes cleared safe lanes through the Iraqi minefields. Eventually, the British 1st Armored Division, equipped with Challenger tanks, was able to move northeast to prevent a counterattack on the right flank. In the Marine Central Command, the 1st Marine Division began its attack at 4 a.m. In a fierce battle for Jabbar Airfield, the Marines' M60A3 tanks destroyed 21 Iraqi T-55s and T-62s. By the end of the day, the Marines were 20 miles inside Kuwait and had taken 10,000 prisoners. On the coastal front, Saudi Arabian 2nd Mechanized Infantry advanced north to Kuwait City, supported by U.S. Marine units assembled for a mock amphibious landing in the Persian Gulf. Marine engineers used mine-clearing line charges to clear 6 lanes in the division sector. By the end of G-Day, the Saudis had advanced 1/3 of the way to Kuwait City. The U.S. Air Force deployed 144 tank-busting A-10 aircraft into the Gulf war zone. In addition to tank killing, the A-10 proved its versatility in western Iraq, suppressing enemy air defenses, attacking early warning radars, and even recording 2 Iraqi helicopter kills with its gun. The Navy shot 282 Tomahawk missiles into the war zone. These were used to destroy surface-to-air missile sites, command and control centers, and electrical power facilities. Many were launched from the Missouri and the Wisconsin. With the coalition advance well underway, a U.S. Navy amphibious force launched a major beach assault that lasted for 2 days. Coalition intelligence found that most of the Iraqi forces in Kuwait City pointed seaward. At one point, 11 Iraqi divisions were committed to defend Kuwait against amphibious attack. The Navy landed a Marine Expeditionary Brigade of 7,500 men in Saudi Arabia, 28 miles south of Iraq. Later investigation revealed that this caused the Iraqi command to hold 4 divisions in Kuwait to meet an amphibious assault that never materialized. At the start of the second day, in the western 18th Airborne Sector, the 101st Airborne Division carried out the longest air assault operation in history, moving 170 miles north along the Iraqi-Saudi border to block Highway 8. In the 7th Corps Sector, the 1st Armored Division destroyed 40 to 50 Iraqi tanks and armored personnel carriers in 10 minutes at a range of 2,000 yards. In the early afternoon, they directed attack helicopters against the Iraqi positions, destroying artillery pieces and several vehicles, and taking almost 300 prisoners. On the Eastern Front, the Marines advanced against the fiercest resistance encountered during the ground offensive. Intense smog from burning oil wells reduced visibility to a few yards. Fighting in near darkness, the 2nd Armored Division's Tiger Brigade in M1 A1s with enhanced optics proved particularly successful at engaging armor at long ranges. In the dust storm and darkness, U.S. technology gave its forces a clear advantage. Tank crews could spot and hit Iraqi tanks at ranges of over 3,500 yards, long before the Iraqis saw them. On G+1, the coalition air forces flew a record number of sorties, over 3,000. Nearly 2,000 were direct close air support missions. The 18th Airborne Corps turned its attack northeast and advanced into the Euphrates River Valley to protect the western and northern flanks. In the afternoon, the 7th Corps found T-72 tanks in prepared defensive positions. Using its thermal imagery equipment, the regiment destroyed every tank it could find. U.S. forces then moved into the suburban towns and villages of Kuwait. The Iraqi forces had fled, leaving disabled tanks and other weapons behind. Over 13,000 prisoners of war were captured. In the south, the Marine Corps made a final dash toward Kuwait, this time on a main highway into the city. On arrival, they liberated Kuwait City International Airport. And the first coalition flight since the Iraqi invasion touched down on Kuwaiti tarmac. On G+3, 18th Airborne units continued to drive east toward the city of Basra, completing the outer encirclement of the Iraqi forces. The 7th Corps continued their drive east and destroyed 61 Iraqi tanks and 34 armored personnel carriers in less than 1 hour. Joint Forces Command North contained 2 Kuwaiti brigades with T-72 tanks. These forces symbolically entered eastern parts of the city and prepared for liberation the following day. The final action was an attack northeast up the Basra Road. Remnants of a whole Iraqi division tried to escape to the west, bumping into the U.S. forces. They immediately attacked with T-72s and missiles. The U.S. engaged with 5 battalions of artillery, Apaches, and a tank brigade, destroying the entire Iraqi division. As far as the eye could see, there was black smoke and burning enemy armor. In all, 30 Iraqi divisions were now assessed as combat ineffective. By the end of the day, the lead M1 Abrams had fewer than 100 gallons of fuel in their 500-gallon tanks. A last-minute rendezvous was made in the desert. Support personnel managed to refuel an entire division by midnight. On day G+4, U.S. forces completed their envelopment of Kuwait City and took up defensive positions to prevent Iraqi troops from escaping. A ceasefire took effect at 8 a.m. In 90 hours of continuous movement and combat, the 7th Corps had achieved devastating results against the best units of the Iraqi army, destroying an estimated 1,300 tanks. A battalion-sized unit entered Kuwait City. 7th Corps then began humanitarian operations to alleviate the suffering of Kuwaiti civilians and refugees. Operation Desert Storm had been rapid and successful. For General Schwarzkopf and the Central Command, it must have seemed like a textbook operation. From the start of the ground offensive, they had managed to eject the Iraqis from Kuwait, recapture the international airport, and liberate Kuwait City, all in just 100 hours. Within 2 weeks of ground war in February 1991, over 4,000 Iraqi tanks were destroyed or captured, 100,000 troops had been killed or wounded, 85,000 captured, and 100,000 had deserted. Coalition forces overran 5 enemy divisions during the campaign. Most Iraqi armor was either destroyed in combat or, afterwards, by demolition. Saddam Hussein had promised the mother of all battles, but it was perhaps the most one-sided conflict in history. Iraq's armored forces had been shattered. The Gulf War clearly demonstrated what happens when a poorly trained army with obsolete equipment ventures onto an electronic, high-tech battlefield.
I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations.